Hi everybody, we've now looked at how we find the macroeconomic equilibrium in an economy and how that's determined. So we've looked at the different factors that determine all of the demand in the economy, the aggregate demand, and then we looked at what will determine the aggregate supply, how much can be supplied overall. And now we need to start looking at the different measurements of an economy. How well is the economy doing? And the first one that we're going to look at is inflation. So what is inflation and how is it measured? Inflation is defined as a sustained increase in the average price level. Sustained means it keeps going. So there's an increase in the average price level for a certain period of time. And it's really important. This is the average price level in the economy. It's not looking at the price of one product, like a pen or coffee or cinema tickets. This is looking at the average price of all goods and services in the economy. Remember that a good is something that's tangible, you can touch it, and a service is something that's intangible, you can't touch it, like a haircut, for example. And the way that we go about finding out what the rate of inflation is and what's happened to the average price level is that we look at a basket of goods, and I'll explain in a minute what this is. And we see, on average, what's happening to the price of this basket of goods. So, on average, what happens to the price? So, at the Office of National Statistics, they go every month. So, monthly, they check the price of the basket of goods and services. They see how much everything in this basket costs. And then they go back the next month and find out the same again and the same again. And they're looking to see whether the price of the things in the basket has gone up or down. And they visit lots of different types of shops and in lots of different areas of the country. So on average, they can have an idea of whether the prices are going up or down. And there are two ways of measuring inflation, which you will have heard of. One is the Consumer Prices Index, the CPI, and the other one is the Retail Prices Index, the RPI. And both of these, as you can see, they're measuring inflation in an index, which we're going to learn about more later on and how you calculate an index. But what this means is that you are always comparing to a certain year, a base year, when your inflation, your rate was 100. If, let's say, in the new month, it's now 110, this means that the average price level has gone up by 10%. If it went up to 115, this would mean the average price level has gone up since this base year by 15%. And we can look over time at what's happened to the average price level. The biggest difference between these two, and the way to remember this, is that the Retail Prices Index, if we rearrange these letters, RPI, this rearranges to be RIP, like RIP, like a rip-off. And a rip-off is where something, that's sort of slang almost, for saying something that's really expensive. And this Retail Prices Index, this includes housing costs. And you could say that houses are very expensive and they're a rip-off. So this includes housing costs. So for example, mortgage, interest, payments. So if you've taken a mortgage, that's a loan to buy your house, how much interest you're paying a month. In the UK, it includes council tax payments. This is how much you have to pay if you are owning a house in the UK or living in a house in the UK. So these are included in the Retail Prices Index, whereas the Consumer Prices Index doesn't include housing costs. And that's one of the main differences between these two. So we know that we need to have this basket of goods and we need to know what's happening to the average price of the things in the basket. So how do we know what's inside the basket? So in order to find out what goes into this basket, the government do a survey called the Living Costs and Food Survey. And this is where they ask approximately 5,000 people every year what they're spending their money on. So it might be that they're spending money on their rent, their electricity, their water, bread, lipstick, going to the cinema, all of these things. And they ask these 5,000 households what they're spending their money on. So all of them will be spending money on different things. But when they've done the survey, overall, they create what they call a basket of goods. This isn't representative of one particular family in real life, but it's an average of what people are buying in the country. So then we have an idea of what people are spending their money on, and then we can find out on average what's happening to the price of those things that are in the basket. Remember, even though it's called a basket of goods, there are also services in there. So for example, a cinema ticket. And this is done annually. And it's quite interesting. Every year they announce new things that have come into the basket and things that have been taken out of the basket. So for example, when we were in the COVID pandemic, there were some very big changes. So in 2021, when what was in the basket was changed, some things that came in, for example, were dumbbells so that people could work out at home rather than going to the gym. Also, hand sanitizer came into the basket. And in the past, only few people would have that in their house, but now nearly everybody does, perhaps everybody. And some things that were taken out of the basket, so for example, fruit smoothies were removed from the basket because tastes have changed, and they were taken out, and instead fruit and vegetable smoothies were put in because people have changed the kind of smoothies they like. And if you look at what's in the basket in, say, 1950, there were extremely different things to what's in there today. And this has to change with the times. And so what they do is they find out what's in the basket. And then the final thing that they have to do is they have to give a weighting to each item that's in the basket. And if a larger proportion of household income is spent on the product in each year, it will have a heavier weighting. So a larger percentage of income spent annually gives a heavier weighting. So you can see on here, for example, that rent is going to have quite a heavy weighting. Electricity will have quite a heavy weighting. Something like a lipstick, let's imagine, even if the lipstick cost, it was a very expensive one, and it was £25, this would only have a small, very small weighting in the basket, because over a year, only a very small percentage of income is spent on lipstick. Something like bread, this might only cost £1 for a loaf of bread, but if a family is buying a loaf every day, this might actually have a heavier weighting. So what happens is every item in the basket is given a weighting, and then all of this creates the index. So all of the information then makes up the index. This is a complicated process, and you don't need to know how to work out the index. But what they'll then do is, as we said down here, so they'll go every month, they'll see what the price of the goods and services is in the basket, and they will apply the weighting to each product. They come up with the index. And then they put the index over time. We can see what's happening to the index number. So if this had happened, that it was 100 in this month, and then the next month, the, let's say, retail prices index was 110, and then the month after that, it was 115, then we'd know that we'd had 10% inflation here. So on average, prices had gone up by 10%. If you wanted to compare from this month to this month, from here to here, the average prices have gone up by 15% because it's gone from 100 to 115. So these are the basics of what inflation is and how it's measured. And then we're going to go on to look at what are the causes of inflation, what types of inflation can you have, and also how will you know what the impact is of inflation on different people.